Hey there everybody, I'm David and I'm here with Brilliant Labs to show you how to assemble your Raspberry Pi kits. Now you should receive a package something like this. It may not be exactly the same, the contents should be very similar. Such. And now for this assembly we won't be needing any of the accessories. I'll just be showing you how to set up the main actual Pi board itself. So you can unpackage it all and bring it out into your workspace or desk or whatever you're using. So right here, we've got the Raspberry Pi keyboard. It should come with this cable, which you can plug in now if you'd like. You would take the smaller end of the cable here and plug that in to the corresponding slot in the middle of the keyboard here. The right way up. Perfect, and we can now leave that for a minute. In this box you should have a white HDMI cable. There will be a USB to micro SD card adapter, which we will not be using, and there will be your SD card. And for actual Raspberry Pi, we have here. Set that down. You should have a case for it. We should have our heat sinks, which will be placed onto the Raspberry Pi. We should have a power cable. And here is the SD card. So, first thing I'd say we will do is take the case and get that ready to be used. So what we will do is, to open it, there's this little section here that looks kind of like a button. It's got a nice little round indent in it. You can give that a nice solid firm push down and the top should pop off. It's a kind of a jarring clicking noise, and it does, I'm not too crazy about it because you sound kind of like you broke something, but you didn't, I promise. It just pushes on these legs here, these little pins, and they detach from their hold here. What's inside the case, these little rubber gel pieces here, these are little feet that you can actually put on the case, little rubberized feet, so it'll stand nicely and it won't slip around on your desk. I'm going to put those on now. There's little rings on the bottom for you to put them inside of each of these. You'll see each one also has a hole in it. This would be for if you want to screw the Pi into something and mount it, but I believe for my purposes and most of your purposes, and for the purpose of learning and just getting used to the Pi, having it as just a little desktop device will probably be easiest. So I'm not worried about putting these feet on. And you could always take them off later, but I don't think you could put them back on then again after. So I'm going to put the rest of these on. Now we've got some nice solid rubber feet, so it's got a bit of grip to it. Now, our Raspberry Pi here, I'll run you through what it has on it. These tall connectors here, the beige and black ones, there's one here, and then there's one here. I'll try not to cover it with my fingers. Here. Those you can insert little LCD screens into. These tiny little sort of pixel style screens that would probably only be like yay big, maybe not even. You can plug those into there. All these small pins back here, those are our Gpio for the Raspberry Pi. That is Raspberry Pi's own connecting style and connector module for connecting on add-ons and additional features and feature devices for the Raspberry Pi. Gpio, I can't remember right now what it stands for, unfortunately. Actually, I can just have a quick check for you. That'll open, and while that loads, what else the Raspberry Pi has is right here. There is an Ethernet plug, so you can plug in your internet connection. There are two USB 3.0 connectors, two USB 2.0 connectors, which serve the same purpose. The only thing is that USB 3.0 can handle more data faster, in simple terms, but these are what you would plug in your mouse and your keyboard and your USB mic and anything else into. And now, a quick little look here on keyboard. General purpose input and output is what GPIO stands for. So for anything that the Pi can't do, you can buy, well, not anything, but for most things that the Pi can't do, you can buy little add-ons that will mount on top using these pins, just for general purpose. And that's how the Pi and the device will communicate. So input into the Pi and output, communicating with the device. Then on this side, this right here is a 3.5 millimeter audio jack, which can be used for headphones or speakers or basically just general audio connection. I believe it is only output and it cannot serve as input, but I may be wrong on that. Then we have two micro HDMI or mini HDMI, sorry, outputs here for the displays. That does mean that you could plug in two displays at once to this, which is a very impressive feature. We will not be doing so, but just so that you know. And when you're not using two displays and you're only using one, there is usually a priority output. So you'll see they're labeled as HDMI 0 and HDMI 1. So the priority output will be HDMI 0. So that is the one you will want to use when you're only using one. Then right here is our power connector. That is where you plug in our power to the Raspberry Pi. And you'll notice that it has no on-off button or anything. There isn't anything on the case for that. It just powers on when you plug it in, and it'll run as long as it's plugged in. So that is something to keep in mind for later. Now, before we can really turn it on or mount it, we got to get it all finished and set up. So what we will be doing next is we'll be applying these heat sinks to it. So these heat sinks here will be mounted on the parts of the Raspberry Pi that get hot. And so what happens is wind passes through these little channels here and draws heat away from the metal, and the metal draws heat away from the parts that get hot. So the parts that we will be putting these on are the CPU, which is the central processing unit, the brain of the computer, if you would. The RAM, or random access memory, which is like basically where the computer stores information and data in the short term. So programs that you're using in the moment, a lot of their data will be stored right there. And I don't recall what the last chip is. It says VLI, but that is another one that also gets kind of hot. So that is one that we'll be using. This one is the Bluetooth chip, and we don't have to worry about that. But you can connect your Raspberry Pi through Bluetooth, but it just doesn't get too hot, so we don't have to be concerned. Now, a good way to know what orientation to put these on, because I remember I had to think about it for a moment, because I didn't know if that would be best or that would be best, is they all have their own shapes and they all correspond to their own different ones. But then this rectangular one would only fit this way, and I would like mine all to match the same direction. So that would mean that we would have the channels going this way, along the shorter dimension of the Pi, the width if you look at it that way. So to attach the heatsinks, there is what's called a thermal compound on the bottom of them, and it's protected by this little bit of blue tape here. Sorry, and you want to remove the blue tape without peeling off the little bit of thermal compound on the bottom, which is very tricky. You want to just get the tape, so that's something to keep in mind. Just the tape. So you'll see the blue underside of the tape when you peel it. You don't want to be peeling anything white off of the bottom, just like that. So it's a little tricky to get them separated. And it doesn't matter if you peel up a little bit of the white, just push it back down and try not to set too far off. And then you will place the heatsink in the center of the CPU, or whichever heatsink you took off in the moment, you will apply it to the center of its corresponding part. So the large one goes on the CPU, and then this thinner rectangular one will go on the RAM. Could be handy to use some sort of edged device like a knife or maybe a pair of scissors to get this off, because it is tricky to separate. There we go. Hold this down here so you can see. There we go. Now we'll place that on the RAM, fairly centered if we can. Now it is a little thinner than the RAM is in its dimensions. That is because the outer edges of the RAM don't get hot. That's not where the cores are. That is just for distributing memory around the rest of the module. And then this last one on the unknown chip, though I'm sure it is labeled in the included manuals. If you would like to look at that and get to know the Pi better in terms of each individual component, that's something to look at. There we go. Cut that a little bit off. Oh. Stuck to me. There we go. And we'll place that there. So they don't really need a moment to dry. I mean, mine aren't perfectly straight, but that won't affect performance. So now that we've got our Raspberry Pi pretty much set up as in terms of what we can do with it in a moment, let's put it in our case. So inside the case there are some instructions. I don't know how well that will come out on camera. There we go, just gotta manipulate the autofocus a bit. Almost had it for a second there. Anyways, you can see on your own. There we go. That's not too bad. It says 1, insert, and 2, snap. And there are some arrows pointing to each one. Now I didn't see those. They're a little hard to see, or you wouldn't think to look there. So I wouldn't blame you if you didn't see them either. So it took me a second to figure out where to put this. But you'll take it with the HDMI ports, the power port, and the headphone port in first, aligning with their corresponding holes in the case, which you can see on this side here. So we'll lower those in so that they kind of line up. Then we'll drop it in. Oh, one side can go down the way. There we go. So they're kind of lined up there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our thumbs and we're going to push down on the Gpio pins until we hear a snap. I click there. So now it's locked into place, pretty firmly seated. We don't have to worry about it. And what's holding it in place is this little clip here. It's gripping underneath it. That is what clicked into place. So then, if you'd want to take it out, put your hand under it and push this out. And there we go. Our Raspberry Pi came right back out again. So careful not to push that when you don't want to. So I'll put the Pi back in. Push until it clicks. And it's just about ready to go. So at this point in time, we don't need to access the inside anymore. So if you would like, you could put on the top again. We put in the wide legs first, and then the thinner legs around where the button is. So the other aspects of the Pi that we have to plug in are this micro SD card, which plugs in here on the bottom. There's a nice little opening in the case for it. It could have been plugged in before we did this, but there wasn't really a need. So what you're going to do is you're going to take it with the gold parts facing upwards, and you will put it into the Pi in that orientation with the gold parts facing into the board, let's say. So you can just put it into that slot. It won't slide in very far. That's okay, it doesn't. It sticks out a fair bit. So don't worry about pushing it in too much. And I should mention that these holes here are also for mounting, should you wish to put screws in your wall, hang it up there, anything like that, or just even in your desk so it doesn't get knocked around. And I'll quickly talk about some of the other I/O, I suppose, which stands for input and output. This is our HDMI cable. So what we will do with this is we will plug the small end right here after taking the provided casing off, and we will plug that into the HDMI port closest to the power plug, like so. And then you will plug the other end into your monitor. I won't be doing so for now just because this is just a show. So run that off to the side, and we will save the power connector for last because it will turn on as soon as it is plugged in, which is something to keep in mind. Now, I will also show you here the keyboard is next. So with the keyboard, you can take it and you can plug it in, here we go, to the USB ports on this side. And you can also plug it Ethernet, which I don't have with me right now at this time, which would be good, but you can set up the Pi using Wi-Fi, not a problem. Now, I plugged it into the USB 2.0 slot. So I can also plug in the provided USB microphone and a mouse, but if we've got the Pi somewhere off on our desk and the USB microphone isn't that, it'll be hard to use it as an actual microphone, and maybe our mouse cable won't reach up. So that is one of the convenient parts of this keyboard. It has what are called USB pass-through. So each of these you can plug in another USB device to. So what I will do is I'll plug in the microphone. There we go. and a mouse. Now this is not the mouse that is included in your kits. I don't have one of those right now. They're all packed away in the kits. But it's the same idea. Now, something else to keep in mind is that the Raspberry Pi does not work with all kinds of mice. Some wireless mice require drivers or initial setups that you won't be able to have on the Pi just starting out. So you won't be able to run through the setup process with them. And even some corded mice, should they be more advanced, should they have colors or extra buttons, they will also need drivers and might not work with the initial setup of the Pi. But you plug these two into the USB keyboard, and now you'll think that's a lot of data. You've got mouse movements, you've got audio input, and you've got keyboard presses. Now, something that'll make that easier or a little faster is if we plug that into USB 3.0 now. Oh, if I can get it here. There we go. So USB 3.0 has the greater information bandwidth to support all of these extra inputs at once, which is convenient because it's a lot easier to lean in and speak into your microphone if it's right there and you've got so much more travel space on your mouse. And then finally, we will plug in the power supply. Now once you do this, we will begin the initial setup of the Raspberry Pi through the configuration upon it booting, which just means turning on for the first time, or turning on at all, I suppose, but it's initial boot, first time. So we'll plug in power to the Raspberry Pi, and I'll plug this into our extension cord. And if you want to take the top off here, just like that, you'll see that we now have some lights in the corner here, green and red. Now that concludes our initial setup of the Pi for the most part. The included hi-fi battery, audio, DAC, external DAC, and amplifier will require some additional setup with the case, should you wish to use that. There will be a separate video on that, and I'll show you here now. It has these extra ports on it here, on the top. And so it will mount on top of the Pi, but in order to access those ports, we will have to take these plastic tabs out, remove them. This can be done with a knife, or some wire clippers, or just regular clippers. Scissors would be hard to fit down there, and they're a little sturdy to break out with your fingers, but you can try that too. Just be careful not to crack the actual case. So that is the conclusion of this video. You should see on your monitor a rainbow screen and the raspberries in the corner as it boots. And then we will provide a separate video to walk you through the process of setting up your Pi in the software configuration.